so much, everyone, for staying with us. More information as to what is happening in the country and more worries about how Nigeria needs to navigate a very difficult situation. Nigeria is a big leader. How it plays within this region and this situation is a whole lot of things worrying a few people. I've come across an information, a communication from very eminent Nigerians, an open letter that has been written to President Bola Tinubu, and look at the caliber of people that have written these letters. The likes of Professor Jibrin Ibrahim, the likes of General Agua, Professor Jega, Professor Kuna, Dr. Kole Shetima, Dr. Abdul, Malam Kabiru Yusuf, Miriam Weiss, Kabiru Adamu, Dr. Usman Bugaje, Dr. Yaya Ashim. These are the kind of Nigerians, and some of those who are even involved in the intent of this letter. Names may not be public, but I tell you, they are eminent Nigerians, high-profile Nigerians that are worried and concerned, and as also sharing their views with President Bola Tinubu. One of the members or the signatories to the open letter, Dr. Kabiru Adamu, he joins us live here in our studio. Thanks so much, Doc, for joining us tonight. Thank you for. And I read this letter, and for me, I feel for a moment as though the letter was addressed to me. The letter was titled "The Niger Coup d'etat Aligning ECOWAS and National Interests." In this letter written to President Tinubu, I hope that he is in receipt of this letter. But what comes to mind? These eminent Nigerians have come together. But if you look at it, most of them are northerners, including yourself. What was the intent of this letter?
First and foremost, to de-escalate the situation. We felt that the situation was at a point where a few things could happen. Number one is ego. If you make a position and then the other side calls your bluff, then at that point, there is a concern that so many things could happen. And so how do we de-escalate the situation? All private citizens, no government official involved. We also recognize that diplomacy is pursued along several lines. There is the official channel, and then what is called tranche A, and then the tranche B diplomacy, where private individuals who have access that government sometimes does not have. And so using that access could provide avenues for conversations. Most times, diplomacy is reliant on intelligence. And where intelligence is effective, then backdoor channels are opened. And in this instance, someone of the caliber, as an example, of former Emir of Kano, Sanusi Lamido, or certain business persons who have strong business relationships in Niger, could open channels that government officials cannot open. And so, as an example, when Sanusi Lamido visited, you saw he was able to achieve what, frankly, even the U.S. diplomats could not achieve. So this was what was in our mind: provide, de-escalate the situation, provide an option for conversations, so that the situation does not lead to unintended consequences.
It looks like ECOWAS has declared war on Niger. Does that look so?
No, not at all. What ECOWAS did is to activate the standby force and then order the standby force. But at the same time, the president reiterated his preference for dialogue. Ordering, a raid or a war on Niger would require a lot. Some are even arguing it may require the involvement of the UN due to certain charters between member states. So I don't think we've reached that stage. Yes, a declaration has been made. It is an increase in the tempo of sanctions that have already been, but I don't think we've reached that stage where a declaration of war.
One of the worries of the signatories to this letter, and in that letter, it said Nigeria has a serious humanitarian crisis with millions of internally displaced persons and hundreds of thousands of refugees, including in Niger. It is important to prevent the worsening of the humanitarian crisis. How large scale could these be?
There are at the moment, I think, 7 Nigerian states that are bordering Niger. We do have at the moment, I think about, I'm not sure of the exact number, but there are Nigerian refugees that are currently in Niger from Sokoto, from Borno, and from several other states as a result of the conflict that are existing in that state. Now, even with the power supply that we've cut to Niger, a humanitarian situation is emerging in Niger. Their hospitals are not able to function the way they want to. Supply of water is affected and all of that. So a humanitarian situation is emerging. And you have to remember that there are about 25 million persons in Niger. Now let's assume that 10% of that 25 million, which is 2.5 million, have to now move into the 7 neighboring states in the north. I do not think, and I'm sure you will agree with me, that the 7 northern states have the capacity to accommodate these 2.5 million. Even if they do, given our current economic circumstances, the consequences would be one that would have a toll on their ability to meet the development aspirations of their people.
And one of the worries is also that there is a possibility of resurgence of Boko Haram insurgency, farmer-headed conflict, banditry, mass kidnapping might be exacerbated. The flow of arms might be, we might see the rise in that. Violent extremism, armed banditry could spread and deepen in our sub-region. What statistics, what data do we have to support that this is a possible tendency?
First off, you need to look at the age-old gun-running channels that exist in the Sahel, most of which are cut across Niger. Niger's landmass is bigger than Nigeria, actually. And
so it's the second largest country on the continent.
In the continent. And given its population, about 25 million, and its capacity, the capacity of the state to man that border, now the weaker the state becomes, the more gaps are created. Now, time will not allow me to go into the details, but I'll mention a few things. The U.S., once the U.S. recognizes that there is a coup in Niger, it may have to restructure or realign its current engagement with Niger, including the closure of some of its military bases. The same thing with Germany, the same thing with France. Now,
how many military bases does the U.S. have?
2. One drone base, and then the other one for its troops.
And one is in the Niamey.
And the other one, I think, somewhere in the border. I can't remember the exact.
Yeah, because I understand that at a time where there was an operation by one a military elite group in northeastern region of the country, that also was coordinated from the Niamey, what I understand. And so in that sense, the United States is deeply involved, and perhaps the reason why we saw the leaders in the United States speaking to President Tinubu in this respect. Am I right?
There are strategic reasons for the presence of those bases in Niger, some of which are directly related to Niger, others are beyond Niger. A good example, Libya. The eyes and ears that the U.S. needs to monitor development, not just in Libya, but across the Sahel. Point I'm trying to make is if those bases are closed, gaps are created, intelligence gaps that now allow these bad elements to continue to grow and then establish themselves. The biggest country in the region is Nigeria. That's where their interest and intention is. And let's not even go too far. Islamic State in West Africa province, what is it trying to achieve? The Jamaat al-Ahl al-Sunnah lil-Dawati wal-Jihad, what are they trying to achieve? Carve out a part of that territory and create their own state. Now, the global effort, the regional effort to counter terrorism, a lot of it, the focus of that is in Niger. Let's not forget that Niger is also a member of 2 of the regional efforts to counter terrorism, the G5 initiative and then the multinational joint task force. With this coup, the cessation of the membership of Niger in these 2 regional efforts is highly likely. Because, of course, after the coup in Mali, Mali's membership of the G5 was suspended. So once this suspension happens, it means the contribution of Niger to these 2 initiatives would probably be suspended. And that means our capacity as a region to address terrorism would be severed significantly. That effort is likely to come back to Nigeria with all our various conflicts that are ongoing. So I think we need to start looking at this from that angle. To answer your question directly, gaps will be created. Terrorist groups would have more opportunity, as it were, to target Nigeria and to carry out some of the activities that they are carrying and, of course, increase them in Nigeria.
Let's take a look at a few information that Dr. Kabir Adamu might help us expatiate on. And that, first and foremost, information about Niger Republic. For a lot of people who do not know, I've mentioned a few times about the language similarities and the language tendency that you might find a lot of, I mean, just like in Dahomey and in some part of your state, you find a lot of similarities in culture and language with the Nigerian people in Benin Republic. You find that happening, just like you go to Lagos and in neighboring state, you find the Badagry are people of Lagos state and their neighbors. You find those cultural tendencies are mingling the same way. The Sokoto, the Katsina, the Bruno, the Jigawa, the Yobe, the Adamawa, in the neighbors, in the fringes of the country, neighbors with Niger, you have a lot of relationships there. So let's take a look at it. In terms of landmass, Niger Republic is massive, the second largest in terms of landmass on the continent. They just have about 25 million. It's just about Lagos and maybe Ogun State put together. If you look at it also, the most part of Niger is of that landmass of over 1 million square kilometers of desert areas. But again, what has happened over the last few years is the fact that, I mean, a few days rather, the timeline, let's take a look at the timeline of what has happened in recent times. So from the 26th day of July, these are some of the activities. The military junta detained, toppled President Muhammadu Bazoum's government, a democratically elected government in that country, and we find that the head of that junta who declared himself, and they detained that president, held him hostage. From that moment, ECOWAS, led by President Tinubu, issued a 7-day ultimatum. And what has happened over that time is that the neighbors, Mali and Burkina Faso, they've shown solidarity. Don't forget, in Burkina Faso is also a military junta controlling that country. And of course, they have also shown support, and there's a threat against any military intervention. If you flip the page, you see what has happened over the last few days. Nigeria and ECOWAS delegation, you see Sultan of Sokoto, former head of state, they've gone to that country, met with the head of the military junta, and the meeting was deadlocked. Nigeria has shut its border, cut power, and the president had also approached the parliament, the Nigerian Senate, to ask for some kind of intervention. They warned the president not to put boots on the ground in that country. Now, what has happened is that there is an expiration of that ultimatum to that country. But the military, there was a meeting of the Chief of Staff Committee on that on Niger. But again, at the end of the day, it looks like the military guys in Niger are holding their own. There is a standoff right now leading up to the meeting of today, where they have issued the fact that there will be an open door to consultation and meeting and diplomatic talks. But again, a standby force will be deployed if necessary to restore peace. This is what has happened. These are some of the information, Doc. What sense can you make out of it?
Just to add to that information, today, calling the bluff of the ECOWAS, the military junta named its cabinet.
Absolutely.
On the same day that the ECOWAS is meeting. So clearly telling ECOWAS that they are not ready to negotiate, to discuss. And I think that is why the stand by ECOWAS needs to be supported by every law-abiding and patriotic Nigerian. We are united, and I hope so, in the fact that the only way we'll accept the change of government is through the ballot box. Anyone who attempts anything outside of that, I think the owners and we need to agree as a whole that we should reject that. Now, having said that, how do we go about doing that? And I think that's the discussion, argument here. Should we have mentioned military intervention? Is it the mentioning of military intervention that is now creating this difficult situation that we're in? How do we move ahead to allow for some form of discussions that would lead to where we are? One thing that is important, and I'm happy to note in your timeline that you've emphasized that point. Niger and Nigeria share more than just the normal relationship. There is a strategic relationship between the two countries. Given the landmass that Niger has, if that landmass becomes an avenue of vulnerabilities to affect Nigeria, then age-long historical relationships would have been completely destroyed.
Is this a fear of the leaders in the north?
Partly, it is.
Beyond that, are there other issues that most Nigerians may not be privy to?
Consequences. You can win a particular battle, but lose the war. We can topple the junta, but what would follow that consequence? Just to give you an example, our power supply, which is, well, I think about 30%, if I'm right, dependent on hydro, and of course on River Niger. We have an age-old agreement with Niger to supply them power based on certain treaties that we've signed with them. We've unilaterally cut that.
The Nigerian authority is saying they are owing us billions.
That's a different thing. If we raise...
As a reason for the sanctions.
If we raise that and use it as a reason to cut, that's a different thing. But here, we're using... Someone willingly took his vulnerability and handed over to you because he trusts you as a brother. And then at his weakest point, you use that vulnerability. After the war, what will Niger do? So those are the consequences that we need to think about. If before now they trusted us, what will they still trust us after this issue? Because one day we'll be behind this, either through this what is going on right now, or eventually they'll hand over.
So there are those also who are putting ethnic tendency into this matter, and I've heard this argument. And I don't know where this sits with you. You are also a leader and a force within the northern region of the country and in the country as a voice in your own area. And those who believe that President Bola Tinubu is of the southern Nigeria, and the fact that the north and Niger have a lot of things in common. A war on Niger, they see it as a war against them. And the fact that if the president moved militarily against Niger, is moving against the northern region of the country. Is there any truth in that?
You're right. There is a narrative going around. And the first time I heard it, I've never in my adult life believed that the issue of social cohesion was a challenge in Nigeria as at this moment. I found those allegations ridiculous. I found them quite alarming. And I'm completely worried that as a nation, we're not addressing the root causes that allow this type of narratives to emerge, including in places where, frankly, you would never expect them to emerge. Point I'm making is there is that narrative out there. Is it the right narrative? No. Why is that narrative there? Because we're not using strategic communication to portray our position and then to get the buy-in of the people. The APC administration, the Bola Ahmed Tinubu administration, mentioned in its manifesto, the Renewed Hope manifesto, that it intends to win the hearts and minds of Nigerians. I'm waiting for a strategic communication mechanism that it would release to tell us how it intends to go about winning the hearts and minds of people. A position came out that was ECOWAS position. The average Nigerian, especially the people who are pushing this narrative regarding ethnicity and perhaps even religion to an extent in certain areas, perhaps are not even aware of the fact that this is an ECOWAS position and not necessarily a Nigerian position. How do we address that? Strategic communication.
We need to go now, but in 30 seconds, if you may, Dr. Adamu, I'd like to ask you, Nigeria is like a Russia, Germany, France in West. Nigeria is like a United States in part of the Americas. We need a strong leader in Nigeria that can be the face of Africa. How much of strength can Bola Tinubu show to give that strength to the continent of Africa?
I think he's showing that. He's been resolute in his position. What I would love to see to support that is the mechanism of governance around him. That would include, for instance, him naming his cabinet, making sure that that cabinet goes around mobilizing. He mentioned when he visited Jaji that he will harness our national powers. So I'm waiting to see a cabinet that would recognize that power, especially national power, is at the center of all of this. How do we harness that national power to achieve our national interests? I think it's as simple as that.
Dr. Kabiru Adamu is the MD of Beacon Consulting Limited, a security outfit here in Abuja, Nigeria, and a security consultant. Thank you so much for these perspectives that we shared tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Appreciate it.